What red flags about a company have you encountered while interviewing for a job? Serious. We work hard and play hard. Double quote. Bullshit. You just work hard and have awkward social get-togethers at most once a month. This isn't Wall Street. All that's going to happen is that you're going to make me work 60 hours a week because of this mentality. I'm encountering a series of red flags right now. So far I've had 5 rounds, yes, 5, of interviews for a mid-level managerial job. All but one of which were rescheduled by the company at the last minute due to conflicts with the various interviewers. I finally reached the final round with a senior executive a couple of days ago. Only to have that person show up in an annoyed huff and announce they had only just now received my resume. They then went on to say, and I quote, "I don't even know why they're considering you for this role." They then followed up with this gem. "Which one of our offices is this for again?" Needless to say, after all that rigmarole, I plan on turning down the offer if they send one. Number of contractors to employees ratio. Also, specific keywords such as unlimited potential income or this is not a scam. Extremely high turnover or you are being interviewed by people who have worked in their department for 1 year. I saw one of those ads that said work for students. $15 HR. Or something. I called the number and set up an interview. Should have known not to interview for a job you don't have to apply for. I got there and it was this crappy building downtown with flickering fluorescent lights. They brought me to a room not unlike a doctor's waiting room where several other people sat filling out papers. I was skeptical but needed a job, so I started filling out my paperwork. When I flipped the page over, I finally saw the name of the company I was applying to. Vector Marketing. I only knew about them because a friend of mine sold Cutco knives for a while. I crumpled up the paper and left without a word. Last interview I went to, they told me they were going to be bigger than Facebook. The company had 6 FB likes and a webpage smothered with errors and got angry at me when I suggested some easy 1-minute steps to fix them. It was for a tech company. These are all pretty good red flags so far. But I'll add a few I've encountered. It took me a long time into my career to trust my instincts on these red flags. 1. When you are going to be reporting to more than one person department. 2. Super condescending attitudes on behalf of the interviewer. 3. I work in IT and I had a manager ask me once what I would do if I knew that restarting the system was not going to fix the problem and might make it worse. But he would tell me to restart it anyway or find a new job. I told him, if it's going to make things worse, I'm not going to restart the system regardless of what you tell me do. I ended up getting the job. But that question actually turned out to be a huge red flag. He tried to pull shit like that all the time. 4. If I can't stand someone's personality in a short interview, I'm not going to be able to stand working for them. Yesterday I was filling out an application to become a part-time tutor at a prison. I had to fill out a 100-question multiple choice assessment. Some of the questions: how much cocaine do you do? How much money do you steal from your employer? How much money do you think it is okay to steal? How much money do you think the average person steals from their employer? How often do you come to work under the influence of marijuana? How often do you come to work under the influence of cocaine? How often do you sexually harass your coworkers? On and on this went for 100 questions. By the end I was thinking of putting down often 1-5 times a week for how often I used LSD at work. If they ask you to pay a single cent for anything, you are being scammed. No legitimate job I've had has ever required me to pay for anything necessary to do my job. Edit. I feel like I should clarify. I was referring to employers who require you to buy things from them to do your job. Not having to buy a pair of shoes, or a uniform, a small tool set, or get maintainer certification. Being left waiting for half an hour for the interviewer. I picked up my bag and walked out. Went for a marketing executive role, turned up the office was almost totally bare except for 8 or 9 mismatched chairs. We were called into a side office for interview. The central heating wasn't working, so the interviewer was wearing gloves and a winter jacket. When he mentioned it was commission only pay, I walked straight out. Beware the Cobra Group, they are just charity fundraisers who give their jobs outrageously misleading titles like marketing executive. They won't disclose the salary range before setting up an interview. No disclosure? No way, I am going to even waste my time talking to you. Edit. This may vary depending on the industry. I have found it helpful when trying to determine if the vague job description is legit. And if so, then if it's entry level, mid-level, or senior level, etc. There is really no point in going through an interview process only to find out you are under or overqualified for the position and won't be a good fit. Right after I graduated, I interviewed for an entry-level data entry admin position. They offered to hire me if I paid them $750 to complete their training course. Question: what kind of workload can I expect on the average week? I've heard horror stories of 80 hours work weeks at big companies. Answer: let's not beat around the bush. All companies expect a 50-60 hours week. They don't say they do, but they do. Got right out of there. I'm very happy at my current job that doesn't even require me to answer emails outside of the 40 hours I work. I think in any interview you want to ask questions about the company when it comes time for you to ask questions. 1. You want to specifically ask about the culture. Ask the interviewer what they think about the culture. 2. Ask what kind of turnaround the company has. Low turnover probably means a good environment. 3. Ask the interviewer what they like most about working at the company. Pay attention to their body language and their answer. They're probably not going to be honest if they hate it, but you might be able to tell. If they tell you they don't like it, that's a huge red flag. Interviewer: how do you handle conflict? Such as, if you work with someone who might yell a lot. Me: well, I don't think anyone should yell at someone while working. Interviewer: your direct report has a history of being passionate about his work. Oftentimes he raises his voice and it might make people uncomfortable. Red flag. Red flag. Run. Having to come back for an interview over and over and over and over again. First a headhunter agency, then HR, then regional managers, then sales managers, then team managers. And all of them asking the exact same questions. What a waste of time that was. After interview number 5 they wanted to schedule number 6 and I told them enough is enough. When you show up for an interview for an internship as a 20-year-old woman and are greeted by a 45-plus-year-old man who doesn't ask you any questions, but instead gives you a bunch of articles and photographs about his bodybuilding career when he was younger. He just seemed too sketchy. Called 2 days later and left a message saying I was hired. I don't even know what he was hiring me for and I never contacted him again. That whole situation seemed like a red flag. When I was first looking into an office IT position, I was on an interview when someone knocked on the office door, asked a question and left. After he left, the interviewer told me that's the person we're going to fire when you get this job. Double quote. Gave me a bad vibe. So I turned down the offer when I got it. Joke of an offer too. $21k a year. I was making $40k a year working in retail. Your job entails this and several other tasks we'll get to once you've started. Double quote. Had an interview with one of those predatory loan companies. After giving a brief explanation of how shitty the loans are, the interviewer asked, do you have any moral objections to working here? Double quote. If you have to ask, that's probably a bad sign. I noped right out of there. During an interview, my future boss mentioned that my predecessors flaked out after a day and 2 weeks, respectively. Turns out, they didn't flake. He's just a massive asshole. I lasted 5 months. I interviewed for a fairly high position, head of operations, for a medium-sized company. The owner kept taking business calls while interviewing me. Interrupted at least 12 times in an hour. Made me feel unimportant. And he probably would be difficult to communicate with in the future. They ended up offering me the position. I declined. Thankfully I found a much better company since. Pre-interview. But if a company's website is tailored towards recruiting new employees way more than it is towards the clients, it's a bad sign. A real, reputable company that is making money wants their website to be client-facing first, and have a tab or link somewhere for careers for those who are interested. If 50% or more of the main landing page is catered towards selling you on why they're such a good career choice, it's either a scam, B, a meat grinder business where turnover is extremely high, or C, a company that has no idea what it's doing. When I went to their website there were way too many statements in large bold font about how much money you can make with few credentials. Our top performers make over 100k a year. No college degree required. Sign up now. Double quote. Any marketing job where they want you to use your own network of social contacts to sell their product. Interview was rescheduled twice. And once I actually got to the interview I found the office was a mess and everything was completely disorganized, and during the interview the phone rang at least 3 dozen times and my interviewer stopped the interview each time to answer the phone in order to give people directions or information about applying for positions. Had it not been for the phone calls our interview would have lasted a minute, as she pretty much asked me 3 questions and then wanted to schedule me for a follow-up with someone else another day. Ridiculous. On top of all that, my interviewer was basically the secretary, and practically fresh out of college, and seemed in way over her head. Then, to top it all off, the position turned out to be temp to perm and it wasn't even the same position I applied for. They had several different positions to fill in different departments, and when I said I intended to apply for the one advertised, she shrugged. Any indication that I will be answering to more than one person is a sign of a dysfunctional work environment. I returned a call from a potential interview asking what time she'd like to meet. She started yelling at me barely 2 sentences in, telling me I was an irresponsible little shitty. I tried to explain that I hadn't scheduled an interview yet. She called back an hour later, explaining that she thought I was someone else who didn't show up to their interview. She apologized profusely and told me she'd love to interview me if I was brave enough. I learned, by doing some investigation, that another company was interested in buying them out. If so, the job I was applying for would be moved halfway across the country. Thus, if offered the position, I might have to uproot and move shortly after beginning. The more the interviewer tried to downplay and sidestep this important fact, the more I became convinced that I didn't want to be part of it. Late to the game, I interviewed for a place that was being federally investigated for unfair practices, hacking their competitors, and had already changed their name once. They never mentioned this directly. I found out through research, asked about it, and was told something to the effect of, paraphrasing, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It'll be dropped." Besides, those passwords were guessable. Noped out on that one. I've had a number of interviews at places where there was obviously some type of team personnel toxicity. You can tell by the types of questions they ask if there is something really messed up going on in this work environment. After completing the initial interview, I did some research. Apparently the dental company I was interviewing for was owned by Scientologists and required their employees to attend mandatory Scientology classes. Also, they made me take an IQ test which was wholly unlike any IQ I've ever taken before. If anyone's curious, the company is Brightside Dental. Went for a marketing company which was selling bullshit door to door. Not my style. And the ad online lied. Not to mention the man interviewing me was my age, 20s, and flirted with me. Asked me if I had a boyfriend and how long I was with him, if we lived together, etc. Very creepy and unprofessional. Desperate for a job, I reluctantly agreed to try one day to see what it was like. When he called the next day I immediately declined. Horrid. Unprofessional. Creepy. Worst experience ever. Had an interview scheduled for what sounded like a job I am well qualified for. The day before the interview I drove out to the business to see it. It has no signage. Was old and in a rundown industrial area. I cancelled on some BS excuse. Didn't have the heart to tell them what I thought of the place. Owner of the company during the interview. I know your last employer had a game room. Here we have fun by working hard. I worked there for 2 years. But I was unemployed when I took the job. I didn't even make it to the interview. I had to make a profile on their website to fill out an online application. In the middle of the application I had second thoughts. And saved it as a draft to maybe complete later. The next couple days involved them calling me 4 times a day to tell me to hurry and finish my application so they could schedule an interview with me. Ended up blocking their number and deleting my profile. I was working for a fast food chain in high school college. And I would transfer stores as I moved. One store held open interviews every Tuesday because the turnover rate was so high. It remains to this day my least favorite place of employment because it was so damn awful. My second least favorite was a retail store. For the most part it wasn't hard at all. And it could have been a pleasant place to work. The red flag was, during the interview, I was told they provided store credit cards and had quotas to fill. I knew that would be crappy. But a job's a job. It ended up making my job a living hell because, besides being morally opposed to getting people sign up for the cards, as a cashier the pressure for the quota was unreal. Went in for an interview for a coding position. They asked the standard coding questions, couple logic puzzles, the FizzBuzz code exercise, etc. Then they proceeded to grill me on Cassandra, the DB system Facebook created uses, a DB system I've literally read like 3 articles on and have never actually used. I had mentioned it in passing during the phone interview because they asked if I kept up on new technologies. I was later offered a position as a dev DBA working on their Cassandra DB server, citing the fact that I knew Cassandra existed as the primary reason for offering the position. That sounded shady as FCK to me, and I would probably be in over my head on a system I don't really understand while also being paid considerably less than the position offered due to lack of experience. Plus I was sick of unprofessional code shops. I was being interviewed by the manager I would report directly to, while trailing him from the lobby to the conference room where I was to be interviewed. I noticed that nobody in the office made eye contact with him. Red flag number 1. About 5 minutes into the interview, he made this comment about a skill I had listed on my resume. If I hire you and find out you can't do this skill, I'm gonna be pissed. Red flag number 2. After that statement I stood and shook his hand and politely said, I think I'm wasting your valuable time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll see myself out. Double quote. First and only time I've left an interview early. I once interviewed with a company 8 times. Each time they were like, we really like you but just need one more interview with this other manager engineer just to be sure. That was a massive red flag in hindsight. Also, during the last interview they kept asking about whether I was okay working overtime and late hours for no extra pay. Dodge a bullet there in hindsight. It being postponed at very short notice. This has happened a fair number of times. And it's almost always because the interviewers are called away to fight some fires on the project. When that happens, it means the project is in trouble. Or the company is f***ing awful at managing things. Every time I've had an interview postponed and I've subsequently taken the job, it's been a chaotic nightmare. So much so that now, when an interview is postponed, I either walk away, or my first question when the interview happens is, so why was the interview postponed? Double quote. Not always a red flag, but startups like to lowball you on salary and offer options. Which you know. If like the lottery a little bit. If it's something you love then go for it. I ended up selling vaporware for about 3 years before I came to my senses. I recently applied online for a job and one of the I agree screens was waiving your right to ever sue them. I immediately stopped and closed the screen. Did you ever see the movie Joe vs. the Volcano? I was called to come and interview for a position for cost accounting at a local hospital. When I walked into their office to interview, first thing I noticed was the horrible lighting from the fluorescent lights that all seemed dingy and broken. Next I noticed the stacks upon stacks of files all over the room, on the floor, on their desks, etc. And all of the plants in the office were dead, with dropped shriveled up leaves on the floor. The people had such depressed and sunken looking faces. I ran from there. I've actually found myself in a job that, within a couple weeks of starting, I regretted. Retrospectively, a few of the cues I should have dug into more were interviewing with a higher level manager ahead of, by a couple weeks. Not in the same session, the hiring manager. Turns out the upper level manager was basically pushing the role onto the hiring manager. Not meeting anyone who would be your peer during the process. Definitely not a good sign if managers feel they need to hide them away for some reason. Positions that have been open much longer than you would expect, depends on seniority of the role. It may indicate that the company either has unrealistic expectations, or that there is not alignment among the internal stakeholders on what they are looking for. I was fresh out of high school looking for work. Went to a call center whose website looked like it had photoshopped random Google images and made a logo. I get to the interview. The job description said 9-5. Weekends off. They tell me I would be working the night shift and weekends. First red flag. Second red flag. They were a health insurance company and the manager couldn't tell me anything else besides that. Might not sound too iffy, but the place was closed about a year later. The turnaround rate. I asked my potential employer that and she got very sketchy. Turns out most people don't last more than a few months because it was a terrible place to work. My biggest red flag is when I ask a direct, reasonable question and they give me a political answer to avoid directly answering my question. This tells me two things. They have something to hide and the person that I am potentially going to work for is an empty suit and won't always be straight with me. I have seen this many times in interviews. I ignored it once because I really liked their product and I regretted it. The management at that company was always spinning their wheels. They were the types of executives that hold a meeting, talk for an hour straight yet say absolutely nothing and come up with no solutions for the problems that were supposed to be discussed in the meeting. I highly recommend that you avoid these types of people at all costs. If they don't respect your time, I would say that is a huge red flag. Story time. After 4 phone interviews, fucking 4, with a major ingredient company, I was invited to the on-site. It was for a plant engineer role and they didn't even take me into the plant for a tour. Just sat in a room with 3 interviewers for 45 minutes after I drive in a snowstorm to get there. This could have been accomplished on the phone. Then after a month of waiting to hear back from them, I finally got a phone call saying that I was their top candidate for the role. But I would have to come in for another on-site, 5 hours away, mind you, to the plant to take an actual tour, then drive to corporate HQ an hour away from the plant in the same day to interview with the engineering team. I basically said FCK that. This is a waste of my time and it's not like your company is the only place I have job prospects. Wound up accepting a different job offer the next day. During the hiring process they talked a lot about large sums of money, but I didn't see anyone there over the age of 25. I was happy in my job, but another company kept pestering me for an interview. I finally said what the hell. They asked how much I would ask for in salary. I quoted a figure twice my current salary. They said fine. No problem. I was already making significantly more than the average for my position. I backed off. And they went out of business later that year. Not really interviewing. But when I was looking into joining the military, the Air Force recruiters turned me away because I didn't weigh enough, was 15 pounds underweight. Went to the Navy recruiting office and told them about this and they said, "Oh, don't worry about that." And fudge my numbers just enough to get me through MEPS. Should have seen that flag from a mile away. I showed at an interview, and the hiring manager said I was supposed to be there yesterday. He was wrong. And I had the voicemail to prove it. He begrudgingly rescheduled. But I declined. No way I was getting hired. And didn't want to work for him anyway. He was a real DCK about it.